Hi, listeners. You're welcome to another episode of the Let's Talk Education Africa podcast. And in the previous episode, we spoke to the national best teacher in Ghana. And in this episode, I'm speaking to someone from Kenya on corporal punishment and positive discipline in schools. It's a real privilege to get to speak to Robert Omwa, who is a teacher and a child rights activist, as well as a certified positive discipline coach teaching in Kenya. And this conversation is going to be about major debates in corporal punishment and drawing from the work of Robert in this area, who has won the state recognition from the former president of Kenya for his advocacy work in his country. So Robert holds a Bachelor of Education in Teaching English and Literature from the University of Nairobi, as well as a Master's in International Education and Development from the University of Sussex as a Chevening Scholar. He is a Young African Leadership Initiative alumni and a Chevening Scholar as well, besides being the coordinator of Beacon Teachers Movement, which is a teacher-led organization championing the rights of peoples. And Robert is also the country coordinator for Youth for Human Rights International in Kenya, as well as the team lead for Precious Seed Africa. He is a thought leader and has written several articles on the subject. And so it's a real privilege to get to talk to Robert. And I have to warn you that my voice in the recording is a bit low. And so kindly listen with less background noise, especially when I pose the questions. And I hope that you're still able to listen and enjoy the conversation. This is Let's Talk Education Africa podcast. Thank you very much for accepting to talk to us again, Robert. It's a pleasure to have you. And we're jumping straight into the discussion now, and we're discussing positive discipline, corporal punishment, and child rights in Africa. Before we get into the discussion, can you give us a brief overview of your work in the area of positive discipline?
Yeah, thank you so much, Stephen, for having me. It was a long way coming. I was looking forward to having this conversation with you. I'm a child rights activist and a teacher and educationist in Kenya. And for the last 7 or so years, I've been very keen on positive discipline. And this has been a concern for me because I've been looking at the number of media reports of students dying, getting maimed, and dropping out of school because of the discipline methods that teachers use. So I was once a teacher who was using corporal punishment, but when I changed my ways, I realized that I've became more effective as a teacher, and it has been a whole lot of a difference for me as a teacher. And as an advocate for this, I only want more teachers to come on board, working with different organizations, working with different teachers, and building my capacity, and also helping to build capacity of teachers at different levels, using different forms like online platforms and every other way that I can put the word out there so that we can make our classrooms safe for children.
Yeah, Robert, you said something very interesting there, that you were a teacher who used to use the cane yourself, but not any longer. And I assume that as a student, you are being caned as well. So this is something that you experienced and you were also carrying on. But I'm interested in knowing, at what point did it hit you that you need to change your ways? What made you change from the teacher who finds discipline in the cane to one that does not?
In our home, a corporal punishment was a method used by my parents, and it was even worse in school. And it even got worse in high school, where even fellow students, student leaders had a permission to discipline fellow students. And what struck me the most is that when I went to the teachers training college, we were never given tools to come out and use in discipline issues. So that really perturbed me. And when I got employed by the government to teach, I found myself drifting into the ways that my teachers used on me, because basically I didn't have the tools. And to say the truth is that it always left a bad taste in my mouth. For a long time, I used the cane to manage my classrooms, until one day I got trained by an NGO called Plan International and Teacher Service Commission, which is the body that employs and deploys teachers. And they took us through the discourses of rights, and I was like, wow, this is it for me. I've never known this is not right. And I started the journey of changing my ways, and I felt different, and I wanted the same for my colleague teachers.
That is really interesting to hear, and this is a positive testimony for the work that the Teacher Service Commission in Kenya, with partners like Plan International, like you have mentioned, is doing to change the narrative. Now, going into the concept, most people know about discipline, but the concept of positive discipline, it's quite new and not known by many. So for audience that are not familiar with what we mean by positive discipline, can you explain what this is and how it can be implemented in schools?
Yeah, thank you so much for that question, Stephen. Positive discipline is actually revolutionary, because it goes down to the core of human being. Every human being, old and young, have a fundamental need for belonging and significance. And there's been a misinformation about discipline, because it has been passed down from generations that discipline basically is to instill fear through pain via the cane, to cow children into doing what the teachers expect them to do. But research and studies has shown that actually destroys the children further. Positive discipline, on the other hand, is a cooperation. It is relationship building. It actually goes down to the reason behind the indiscipline that all children across the world exhibit. Really, they're just being children. And so positive discipline goes to the bottom of why the child is behaving like that. And research has proven that children tend to show what we call as misbehavior because they are discouraged in one way. So positive discipline is using encouragement and using incentives, and also listening to the child and making them feel as important members of the society, so that we help them develop skills that will help them to become contributing members of the society. Punishment really is reacting to how children behave, but positive discipline is working with the children. It takes time, yes, but it helps them to develop skills that helps them to become positive and contributing members of the society.
Yeah, so I mean, if I get what you're trying to say, positive discipline seems a bit more soft in shaping students, where you're using incentives, you're using encouragement, you are being nice and kind towards a child. Someone would argue that this seems to be a more Western concept. And if you talk with some teachers in a lot of African contexts, they would assume, or they would argue, that this is foreign. Do you think that positive discipline has roots in African traditional belief systems?
Stephen, I'll shock you to tell you that actually punishment is what is alien. Traditionally, knowledges were passed from older generations to younger generations. Like in my community, I was told by my grandmom that young girls will sit around fireplaces with their old folks, and young men, adolescents, would sit around fireplaces with the old folks, and the knowledges and the skills to survive were passed from generation to the other. There was no cane in that setup. There was no violence in that setup. What brings this violence that we have domesticated and made African is actually the modern education that was laced with the brutal legacies of colonization. But when the colonizers went and the Black colonizer took up reins of education, that's how violence has continued to reign in classrooms in our communities. But to get to your question, Stephen, that's a question I really meet a lot. The fact that when you talk about positive discipline, people think that we are talking about complacency. But no, when you talk about positive discipline, we are talking about being kind and firm at the same time. If we are talking about an authoritarian teacher, that is one who is only firm. If you're talking about a complacent teacher or parent, he's only kind. But positive discipline is being kind and firm at the same time. So that is a message that we always pass very strongly, that we are not asking parents or teachers to be complacent and just see children misbehaving. No, they have to draw boundaries, teach the skills that they want the children to grow up with, and stick to that. And also be very kind in terms of encouraging and motivating them when they do good. So that really draws the line very clearly.
That is interesting. I think what I find fascinating about some of the things you said is the fact that although in traditional ways of teaching and learning, it's a lot of communication and dialogue rather than the use of force. But when the Black colonizers took over, we decided to continue the legacies of colonization. I think that is a powerful statement. And the global initiative to end all corporal punishment of children is an organization pushing and advocating for the end to corporal punishment. In 2021, they published a report, and in that report, they mentioned that about 68% of African countries have outlawed corporal punishment, and that means that it is illegal for any teacher to cane people. But then there is a wide body of evidence that shows that corporal punishment is endemic. It's still prevalent in a lot of African countries. A UNICEF report from 2017 shows that corporal punishment is widely used in Ghanaian schools despite being banned, and 85% of primary school children had experienced some form of corporal punishment. In Kenya, the Kenya National Bureau of Statistics found that 91% of children between the ages of 2 to 14 had experienced physical punishment, and there are a long list of these studies that has gone on from Benin, Cape Verde, Senegal, South Sudan, Togo, Tunisia, Nigeria, South Africa, Zimbabwe, Uganda, Tanzania, Egypt, Ethiopia, Malawi. The list goes on. And so it seems that although a lot of countries has taken the effort to ban corporal punishment, there's a gap implementation such that it is still ongoing in a lot of schools. How do you explain this?
Thank you so much, Stephen. From the way you've asked the question, really, it shows me that you've done the research, and actually what you're saying is very true, that most African countries are coming on board and banning corporal punishment, which interestingly was legalized in most African states. I would say that's one step in the right direction. I would say that's a positive step to make it work on paper. And I would also like to say that you're right when you say it's illegal on paper, but still highly practiced on the ground. And that's where we come in. And personally, that's where I come in, because as a teacher, I have seen my colleagues grappling with this dilemma. Teachers are in a dilemma because corporal punishment is illegal on paper, but highly practiced. So you asked why these so. I would say that because it's a practice that had been ingrained in teachers' attitude, it had been ingrained in their psyche. It will take time to change. And also, it was made illegal when most African countries had domesticated the United Nations Declaration on the Rights of the Child, that I think was ratified in 1984, something like that. So when these different African countries signed this treaty, they had to go back to their countries and domesticate this treaty. And it was also tied to some aid, as you know, international treaties work. So you realize that maybe in most African countries, they were illegalizing corporal punishment, but the conversations didn't start from bottom up, you see. The conversation started from government policy level, but the parents still believe it's the way to discipline children. Teachers still believe it's the way to discipline children. So there is that mismatch in this policy. It's illegal, yes, but I think it's high time that we need to bring this to the ground and explain to the teachers and the parents why the use of the cane actually destroys and do not help children to be disciplined. So I think there's some work to be done there so that we can marry the two, Stephen.
There is some work to be done there, obviously, I agree with you. And like you put it, it seems that for a lot of educators, the issue of corporal punishment or the practice of corporal punishment has been ingrained because in school you are caned, and that is the way that you know. And there are some parents who would actually go to schools to tell the teachers that this is my child, discipline him, cane him, or her, whatever the government is saying. So you have indeed touched on some of the beliefs and attitudes hindering the implementation of positive discipline. And what steps do you think can be taken to change these beliefs and attitudes? Say a head teacher or a policymaker or an education administrator is listening and is wondering, what can I do about this? What steps do you think can be taken to change this?
Thank you so much for that question. I think the first one is raising awareness, raising awareness and education. This should be done consciously by governments and civil societies. Secondly, governments can also play a role in ending corporal punishment by enacting laws and policies that prohibit this. So I think this can also be done in countries that have not actually effected it, because we have countries where corporal punishment is still legal. The media can also come up very strongly, because we are having so many cases on the media of children having died, children injured in schools, but they only end up there. I think at this point in time, we can task the media fraternity to actually follow up these cases, so that children don't just get hurt. The form news, it's there, people feel bad about it, and it ends there. But to follow up and also have television and radio programs and journalists getting trained and made aware on the ills of corporal punishment. And also this will also reach the parents if the media do their work, because most parents still think corporal punishment is the way to go. Community-based initiatives can also play a role in ending corporal punishment. I think this can be possible when community leaders, such as religious leaders and elders, get educated. You know very well, Stephen, that in most of our religious institutions, where actually violation of children's rights are supported when people quote Bible verses such as spare the rod and spoil the child. And this... where he should go. Yeah, so I think this is another area that we can also do something. And lastly, training of teachers, as I had hinted before, that I felt shortchanged when I left the teachers training college, and I was never given tools to come and handle kids. So I think we need to retool teachers, with skills to basically make our classes less or child-friendly and without any violence. This can only be done at the level of teacher training. I know there are others, but those are the ones that I can find at the top of my brain right now.
Yeah, thank you. And it's great that you ended with teachers, because the studies widely show that teachers specifically are responsible for most violations, followed by parents. And is it the case that teachers do not want to shift to positive discipline, or they do not have the tools that they need, or the capacity, or the orientation? How would you diagnose this? In other words, what challenges do teachers face in implementing positive discipline?
Thank you so much for that question. It actually reminds me of my research at the University of Sussex when I was taking my international education and development course. I studied on this, the challenge of teachers adopting positive discipline. And one thing that came out interestingly was the fact that teachers are finding it hard to even drop the cane as much as they have the tools. So partly, just as you've said, the teachers need to be given the tools. But secondly, being that this is a practice that has been ingrained in teachers' practice, and teachers have this as a behavior that they have inherited from the teachers before them. One challenge I would say is the fact that the environment do not support the use of positive discipline. I know that there's a wave sweeping through Africa where we are shifting from knowledge-based learning to competency-based learning. This, as much as there are challenges with the implementation, but I'm happy because it's moving learning from knowledge, from cramming, and teachers had pressure to produce results really. So we were not looking at the individual child. Remember, I told you positive discipline is about developing the individual child, looking at the child's strengths, why they are misbehaving, and supporting them to move out of that. And that is where the competency-based curriculum comes in strongly, because it will be about the individual child. And if learning becomes about the individual child, then it gives us less violent classes. But when the teacher is under pressure from the administrators, from the government to produce the results, then there's tendency to make the classroom violent to squeeze results out of the students. Secondly, the challenge that teachers face are the parents themselves. You had hinted before that parents also want their children to be caned. I remember I was teaching in a certain school some years back, and a child had misbehaved on Saturday, Stephen. And the parent didn't do anything on Saturday, didn't do anything on Sunday, and dragged this child on Monday morning to school to report the child to the teachers so that the teachers could cane the child. So you can see there's a lot of pressure on the teachers, and teachers have to prove that they are real teachers by using the cane. And in fact, teachers who don't privilege the cane are looked at as less teachers. So there's that pressure. And lastly, knowing that Africa setup is also highly patriarchal. And also from my research, I've realized that corporal punishment is also a gendered practice. So you realize that male teachers privilege corporal punishment as compared to female teachers, simply because male teachers are expected to show strength and to be violent, to maintain that patriarchy, or to maintain the masculinity part of what the community expects of them. So it's really an intertwined issue, but I think we are making strides, and schools will be safe.
Yeah, thank you for that insightful commentary on how these challenges can be addressed. And I mean, drawing from my own experience as a student in primary and junior high school, you have teachers who, when the class is noisy, they walk into their class and say, "All hands on the table." at that point, you're in trouble, because whether you're talking or not, you will be caned. And once this continues for a while, when you see the teacher coming, you pick your book and you are very quiet. And so from that experience, it seems to me that not necessarily that we would be quiet when the teacher is not there, but when we see a particular teacher coming, there's only one student who is the announcer who will say, this teacher is coming, and then we all pretend and we are quiet. But it relates to the point about corporal punishment, or these forms of punishment, not having a longer term impact and instilling fear rather than changing behavior. But on the other hand, there are cases or examples where people would say that, has this particular teacher not disciplined me and not made me come to myself and realize that what I was doing was not wrong, I wouldn't have been where I was today. So I have met some people who felt that it is through the stiffness, or what you are calling as violence, or the caning of the teachers, that put them on an upright path, because they were taking things for granted, and that discipline shaped them. It's still the argument of some teachers who feel that the rise of indiscipline in our schools is as a result of the decrease in corporal punishment, such that teachers feel their power or authority in the cane is being taken away from them. From your perspective, what is the impact of corporal punishment on children's academic performance and emotional well-being?
Thank you so much, Stephen. When you enumerated your experience with the cane, you reminded me of a point about power, and it also ties to what I was talking about, competency-based learning and knowledge-based learning. Competency-based learning really is about it's learner-centered. And you can imagine, if learning is learner-centered, then it puts the teacher as the coach. And in this case, in itself, it forces the teacher to share power with the learners, because the teacher is not now leading the learning, but guiding the learning. So that's why I'm very excited about it, because we are soon seeing less violent classes if this is implemented well. So the problem that we've been having also is the problem of very powerful teachers and children who feel subordinate in the classroom, and some teachers have not found it easy to share this power with the learners, because if this power is distributed in the classroom, then we'll have less violence in the classroom. And to get to your issue where you are talking about teachers feeling, you were saying, some parents and some teachers feel that withdrawing the cane has made some children not to perform well. I would like to tell you that people have different capacities to withstand pain. Stephen, you know that. Even if we have a drought, people will not die on the same day. The people will die on the second day. The people will die after 7 days or after 2 weeks. That's the same thing that happens with corporal punishment. Their research has shown that children have dropped out of school because of this. We have numerous reports of injuries. You know that the cane is being used to instill fear, to make the child do what the teacher wants. So fear in itself is destroying. So as much as a few will be successful out of this pressure, and then later say, oh, I was successful because this teacher beat me up, but there are people who've been destroyed. Stephen, we can't destroy some and celebrate a few who passed through the fire and succeeded. But also, come to think of it, I was caned. If I meet my teacher today and tell him, oh, teacher, you beat me up and you made me a good teacher, what about my classmate who became a bank manager? Can we assume that he was beaten more than me? Or one who is more successful than the bank manager, was he beaten more than anybody else? So it's not right to say that one was beaten and that's made them successful. I think that's a misconception that we need to really talk against. But also to move to your issue of the impact of corporal punishment on academics, it's true that where there is fear, learning do not take place. Stephen, I normally tell teachers that children learn better when they feel better. And the founder of Positive Discipline Association, actually, Jane Nelson, says that where did we get this idea that if we make children feel worse, they'll behave better? It's really wrong. Children behave better when they feel better. Children perform better when they feel better. So I think it's high time we embraced positive discipline, make our classes friendlier, strike relationships with these children, share power with them, and we'll have better and healthier homes and healthier classrooms, which will in turn aid learning.
That is really insightful, and children learn better when they feel better and not when they feel worse through the power of the cane. At this point, we'll take a short break and then we'll be back to wrap up the interview with you, Robert. Thank you for your time, and we'll be right back. We are going to continue our conversation with Robert to finish this up. Thank you for listening and staying with us. Robert, so we're continuing the conversation from where we stopped. And we want to move on from, the prevalence of corporal punishment in some communities, especially in rural communities in Africa, to come back to any success stories. And from your work so far, are there any successful examples of schools or communities that have implemented positive discipline as an alternative to corporal punishment?
Yeah, what I'm looking at now with partnership with an organization called Beacon Teachers Africa, which is a teacher-led organization that champions for the rights of children, is to come up with a model school. So we are trying to identify a school and train the teachers on the tenets of positive discipline so that we can have a working positive discipline model school in Africa, really. There are such schools in the US, and we've really drawn a lot of lessons from them. But at personal level, I've seen a lot of change with the teachers that we work with. And I would say this is also one of the challenges that we've had in terms of training, because we have managed to reach out to teachers, but not wholesomely. From my research, I realized that one of the ways of making the school really child-friendly is to have a whole school approach where teachers are trained, the teachers are trained, and the students are also trained on their rights so that everybody is aware. But what we've had basically is individual teachers picking up these tools and changing their practice in a classroom. And they have shared wonderful life-changing stories about how these tools not only transformed their classrooms, but transformed their ways of delivery. And one teacher even confessed to me that even her health improved when she was less violent, she had less pressure in class, and she enjoyed her teaching more. So basically, I'm doing this by leading by example. I'm not saying it's all smooth. There are teachers who still want to stick to corporal punishment, but we are having colleagues coming on board, and they're saying, wow, these tools work, and they've helped me.
Yeah, it's good to hear that there has been some changes or differences, even if it's at a small scale level. And I do a lot of interactions with schools and head teachers and administrators. And what I observe is that schools in more urban areas where the socioeconomic status of parents are well informed, educated, have little incidences of corporal punishment. And this is the case as well in private schools and international schools where, there's no zero tolerance for any form of corporal punishment at all. And so there are lots of examples of schools where caning is completely out of the way. But like we've mentioned earlier, this practice seems to be more prevalent in rural or low-income communities as compared to other communities. Do you think then that there is some relationship between the level of resources of the socioeconomic status of communities and the likelihood of them using corporal punishment, and what could explain this?
Yeah, it's interesting you brought up that, Stephen, because our education largely is borrowed, really, is borrowed from the West. And we are all trying to really implement it, and talking and researching from most schools in the West. They used corporal punishment back then, but they've dropped it. We cannot continue to privilege corporal punishment because, just rightly as you've said, in high-end schools, it's not there. In urban areas, some urban areas, it's not there, but very prevalent in low-income areas. So what comes out very clearly here, Stephen, is that corporal punishment actually is exacerbating the inequalities that we are having in education sector. When we talk about dropping out of school, when we talk about injuries in classroom, when we talk about disconnect between teachers and learners, then you can imagine there's no learning taking place there. So poor communities continue being poorer because of violence in schools. So governments have to move with speed. Civil societies have to move with speed, and educationists like you and others need to move with speed and speak out against this epidemic that really is making low income and poor communities miss out in education. So it's a real issue, and I can't belabor this point anymore, that we have to make our schools safer to draw people out of poverty.
I find the link you've drawn between corporal punishment and inequality really interesting, and one that I have never thought of or never crossed my mind on this topic. But reflecting on that, there seems to be some point in the fact that the cane and other forms of corporal punishment could lead to instilling fear, making students timid, affecting their self-confidence in a way that allows them to not be expressive enough, affect their public speaking skills, their relationship with adults, and even their relationship with peers in a way that makes them a bit more timid and see themselves as less as compared to other people. And I think that is really interesting, even relating this to dropout rates that are higher in rural areas as compared to urban areas. So thank you for sharing that. But still coming to hinging on the home and parent, do you think that given the ban on corporal punishment, parents who want to be able to discipline their children could be taken on for that? Do you think we are going to get to a time in our countries where parents could be taken on for disciplining their own children?
Please, I lost the last part of that question. Maybe if you...
The government can easily control what happens in the school setting through the education services and the regulatory bodies. But in terms of corporal punishment at the home level, to what extent, if I'm framing the question in another way, to what extent can government hold parents to ensuring positive discipline and not using corporal punishment? And this is in relation to fears that the government cannot tell parent being the government cannot tell them whether they should cane their own children or not. And there are wide fears about positive discipline measures and whether there would be a time where a parent could be punished or taken on because they punished their own child or they caned their own children.
Yeah, Stephen, thank you for that. I think this problem, just as I hinted before, is systemic. It's systemic in the sense that in 64 countries, as you said, the practice is illegal, and yet it's being practiced. So I think it's high time that the governments are called out to really implement this legislation. And it's my opinion that effecting arrests or using force on parents to implement this policy in their homes will not work. We need investments in terms of educating the parents. We need investments in terms of educating the teachers, because teachers are also parents. And we will not go far if we have teachers dropping the cane and these children are still beaten at home. There'll be still a mismatch. So what we need is education of the parents through mass media, through civil societies, through religious institutions, like we hinted, so that the parents can take up this initiative of defending the children. Later this month, I suspect one documentary that I have been working with the BBC, where we are basically discussing how children are getting hurt in schools. And we are seeing parents coming up in arms and really speaking against corporal punishment. We need not only speak against it when a child has lost a life, which is very, very unfortunate, or when a child has been maimed, but we need to be proactive as parents and teachers and speak out against this through capacity building of parents. I think that's the only way that we will be able to support parents. But with the misinformation and the misconceptions that are flying all around, we may still be going around this quagmire that we are having.
Yeah, I like that you stress that we need to use dialogue and education rather than use laws and some form of force to make parents stop the form of discipline that they are comfortable with. But of course, like you've hinted in the BBC documentary you are leading to, there are parents who are advocates for positive discipline. There are parents who will not take it lightly if their children will is caned in school, and so there are lots of positive examples of that. But on a more practical level, let's say you live in a neighborhood where you see a guardian, it could be a parent or not, or a teacher in a school inflicting pain or caning a child or hitting a child, either in a school setting, in a home setting, but you do not have any relationship with this child. I mean, they are not someone you know. As a bystander, what can you do about the situation?
That's a tough question, Stephen, because I think I find myself in such a situation many times, and it has been very tough for me, I must confess. Why has it been tough for me as much as I'm a child rights activist? We are being very careful, Stephen, so that we do not talk of one solution fit all. We are not, so that we are not talking of it has worked somewhere, it must work here. And the relationships in Africa, families are also different. Remember, here children are supposed to be seen and not to be heard. So I normally get in, be it a teacher beating a child or a parent beating a child. I normally intervene if I see that the force that is being applied is too much and is almost causing grievous harm. I'm not saying little force is good, but I'm doing that because I'm being careful not to wedge a gap between the parent and the child. Because the parents really love the children, Stephen. I may shock you that most of these children, these parents or teachers who beat the kids, actually, from my research, I was shocked that they beat them out of love. So the love, this love that is tainted, is something that for me, I would have a conversation with this parent after they are through, or with the teacher, and just make them know that the way of disciplining the child is actually destroying the child further. But I'm being very careful so that I don't do it in front of the child, because at the end of the day, this child still depends on this parent for support, for education, for survival. So I'm huge on educating the parents and educating the teachers. As much as I would like a totally 100% free classrooms and environments, I'm also very, very careful so that I don't wage a gap between the teachers and the students, or the parents and the students. It's quite a dilemma, but we are making strides, and that was a tough question, I must say.
Yeah, I like the tact that you have equally demonstrated in dealing with a practical issue like that in a way that does not affect the relationship and causes further conflict, but still using dialogue and communication and broken understanding between the parties, rather than being the sort of positive discipline police going around and ensuring law and order in the community. So, I mean, it's been an insightful conversation. It's been a learning experience for me, and I'm sure our audience has picked some learnings from our discussion today. And that would be the end of this interview, especially in the interest of time. But there would be opportunities to engage you further on this, Robert. And we really appreciate making time to talk to us on the Let's Talk Education podcast, Africa Today.
Thank you so much, Stephen. Pleasure was all mine. And I want to thank you, viewers, for the support that they're giving you. I would encourage them to share these conversations and maybe also reach out and see how we can work together, maybe online or through all the available platforms, so that we can spread the news and make our classrooms safe so that our children can learn better. We are in the 21st century where we need creativity. And I can assure you, Stephen, that we cannot nurture creativity in our continent if we are still using fear to teach our kids. With fear, there will be no creativity and we'll remain behind. So we can do it if we hold hands. Thank you so much for having me.
Yeah, thank you so much. And before you go, Robert, if someone is interested in the work you do, wants to partner, just want to learn more, what are the channels they can follow you or your work on?
Yeah, I'm on Facebook with my name, Robert Omwa. So if you search for me on Facebook, Robert Omwa, you can send me a message, or you can reach me on my email, which is omwarobert@gmail.com, or you can also reach out through my website, which is robertomwa.com.
Yeah, for listeners who are wondering how to spell Omwa, is OMWA, and then Robert is ROBERT. Thank you very much for sharing. I'm sure you can be followed on LinkedIn as well with the same name.
Yes.
And so
yes, yeah. And Twitter.
Yeah. So it's a pleasure to speak with you, and we'll call it a day. Thank you very much for listening to that conversation with Robert. Remember, you can follow this podcast and other conversations on social media platforms. We are Let's Talk Education Africa on LinkedIn, on Twitter, as well as on Instagram. My name is Stephen Senyo Tettegah, and until next time, this is Let's Talk Education Africa.